Welcome into the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast presented by SeatGeek, a podcast dedicated to everything you need to know about the squad.
Bounce feed to Nance. Have mercy! Throw it down, Nance! Yet again! Larry with the hammer time.
The New Orleans Pelicans Podcast starts right now.
Welcome to the Pelicans Podcast presented by SeatGeek. I am Joe Cardosi, joined by the forever gritty Jim Eichenhofer. Today we are continuing our player recaps, and we are so glad to have Mr. Larry Nance Jr. as the subject today because, Jim, he's just a fun dude to cover in basketball, both on the court and off the court.
He is. I mean, I think one thing that's been fun about this Pelicans team is that, you know, sometimes you see, like, here's the all-interview team across the NBA. I feel like
the whole Pelicans team.
Yeah, I feel like we
have.
There's probably legitimately. I mean, I might be forgetting someone, but there's probably at least 3 to 4 guys that would have a shot at being on the all-interview team. When you talk about Larry Nance, Trey Murphy, C.J. McCollum, those guys immediately come to mind as far as guys that are great to talk to. There's a few other under-the-radar guys that I have enjoyed as well.
Billy?
Yeah, Billy's great.
Yeah.
Josh Richardson, you know, we did a few Jim exclusives with him.
That's true.
I feel like we may have been the number one media source of Josh Richardson interviews.
We were the
second half
pipeline
of
of Josh Richardson news this season. Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, there's a lot of guys that are great to talk to, but Larry, sometimes I judge interviewees too by if someone asks like a terrible question or something that doesn't make any sense and he still comes up with a great response. I feel like Larry's one of those guys that like you could ask him anything if you're writing an article about any topic and he'll fill the notebook quickly with a bunch of stuff that you hadn't thought of before.
Wasn't he a mass comm major or something?
Was he? I'm not sure.
I feel like he's very media savvy.
No doubt.
If he wasn't, he had to take some classes or something because he's got to be the most media savvy member. Actually, that's a toss up too because between C.J. McCollum and Larry Nance, that's a dogfight.
Yeah.
But man, you've got some leadership, and we sort of talk about it with our guest today, who's going to be Erin Summers, our sideline reporter. But you know, Larry Nance is a guy. He's a leadership guy, sort of off the bench. You know, C.J. McCollum seems to be sort of our glue for the starters, and it almost seems like Larry Nance might be that glue for our bench players.
And I think it's important because, you know, those guys are on the floor at the same time here and there, but, you know, for the most part, C.J.'s out there with the first string and Larry's out there with the second string. So it's important to have, you know, separate leaders that can kind of control things. I think Larry, you know, we talked about his communication off the court as far as how savvy he is with the media, but I think the fact that he's a great communicator on the floor is also very valuable defensively. He's kind of on the back line and directing guys, calling out screens, saying, hey, you need to, you know, watch the guy coming left. Yeah. And just the fact that he's pretty verbose on the floor, I think that's another element of why he's super valuable on the defensive end.
You know, and there's so much going on. I think it's easy to forget sort of some of the dates and some of the stuff coming up here. But, you know, free agency and whatnot in the NBA. Another big story people are going to be paying attention to, Jim, of course.
Yeah, and that was one thing. David Griffin was asked the day or 2 days after the season ended, you know, are you looking at this offseason similarly to 2022? And he said kind of not really because last year we didn't really have any free agents to contend with and to make big decisions on, whereas this year is a little different. So, it's something that people will be watching closely on July 1st. I think really kind of to simplify it as much as possible, I think the main 2 things that the Pelicans fans have to look at in terms of free agency is Josh Richardson is an unrestricted free agent. After the trade, obviously you knew that you might only have him under contract for a couple months, and then the season would end, and then you're going to have to go from there and make a decision on him. And then the other player to kind of watch is Jaxson Hayes. He's going to be restricted free agent, which means that the Pelicans will have the opportunity to match any offer from another team. I don't really want to get into too deep into the specifics of any individual player's free agency or his market.
Yeah, it can get muddy with each one. Yeah,
but basically, I mean, to make a long story short, I'm just curious to see what kind of offers that he'll get. It's really hard to predict, so I guess we'll have to wait until July 1st and see. And then one specific thing that we should mention too, the moratorium, I'm pretty sure, I looked this up, and if what I looked up is correct, the moratorium is July 6th, so once again, we'll have a period of 5 days where there's discussions and reporting on free agents, but the teams themselves will not be able to publicly announce free agent additions or moves until July 6th, at which point Joe and myself might have a special show.
Yeah, we could talk about facts then instead of just speculation.
Right. So that'll be something to look forward to. And I think I mentioned this on a previous show that Summer League starts July 7th and goes through the 17th. So it'll be a nice, busy time right around the 4th of July like it is every year.
Yeah, so get ready, enjoy your summer, have yourself a summer, and we will be lurking around here. We never stop grinding here at the Pelicans Podcast, and we've talked about it on the Pelicans Podcast before. You know, we didn't expect to win the championship this season. Doesn't make not going into the playoffs any less disappointing, but the thing about it is it's the long game with the Pelicans.
Mm-hmm.
You're looking to build a contender for years to come. And you know what? You look at the young pieces that they have and some of the pieces you talked about, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, et cetera. They're just going to be huge parts of this team going forward. And, you know, Larry Nance Jr. is a huge part of a lot of some of these players' mental growth, it seems like. He's just such a great guy to learn from, to figure out how to talk to the media from, and how to do business and how to treat people from. He's just a great community guy. He's a great glue guy. And he's great on the floor when he's healthy, and we hope that he gets better in this offseason. So let's talk to our own sideline reporter, Erin Summers, about Mr. Larry Nance Jr. Joining us on the Pelicans Podcast, so happy to have her strolling into the studio once again on this Wednesday. Erin Summers, sideline reporter for our Pelicans team. She is there to help Graf from being a barking dog sometimes and give us the good info on the sidelines. Thanks so much for joining us once again today. Larry Nance Jr. is always a fun guy to talk about. Another media-savvy dude. We talked to you about Trey Murphy before. Larry Nance Jr., a savvy vet compared to Trey Murphy, I guess, in terms of age. But, man, just as fun to listen to. He's a verbose, media-savvy guy. Seemed to have a lot to say at the end of the season, too.
He's awesome. He's one of my favorite people to talk to. And he's made a point of saying, like, if I say something, then I've thought about it, I mean it, you know, like, and I appreciate that he does, you know, put thought into,
he's very thoughtful
into what he's saying. And he's such an advocate for the other players on the team. You know, he'll praise them for the work that they've put in. I remember
defending Zion recently against an unnamed guy.
Right. And then towards the end of the season, you know, Dyson Daniels had a little bit of a slump, and watching practices, Larry was just like his biggest cheerleader throughout practice. Every time Dyson hit his shot, he was like, "Yeah, Dyson, that's what we like." Like, yeah, you know,
and
like,
he needed that,
right? And he relates very well to everybody, and he can like see what somebody needs and be that.
Just whip smart, and and that's what you love about him. He seems very adaptable. He seems to recognize what people need. And he's been a huge presence in terms of leadership, along with C.J. McCollum, I feel like, on this team, Jim.
You know, one of the ways that I would kind of try to best sum up his personality, or just the way that he operates within the team, is, you know, obviously he and Jonas Valanciunas are kind of splitting the center minutes. They don't really ever play together, so when one guy plays, the other guy isn't playing. But to Erin's point, I mean, you could say Larry was one of the biggest Jonas supporters on the team as well, even though, you know, sometimes if Jonas has a big game, that means Larry's not going to play as much.
Sure.
But he's totally fine with that. And you can tell it's a genuine thing that he's when Jonas had a couple stretches during the season where maybe he wasn't playing as well, or maybe his minutes were down a little bit, Larry was always commenting after a good game that Jonas had, like, man, it was awesome to see him play that way. So, I mean, that just seems like the kind of person he is. I feel like I don't know Larry extremely well yet, just because he hasn't been here that long in the scheme of things. I mean, he's only been here for maybe a year and 3 months after that trade last February, and he didn't play a ton the first season because he was still going through trying to get back on the court. But he's just been so impressive to me in so many different ways, off the court and as well as on the court. I mean, he was so valuable this year in terms of fourth quarters and just some of the defensive stuff that he provided.
I think the way that he held down like the bench unit and brought those guys along this season was huge. You know, like he really made that kind of like its own little team, right? He was there to help them, show them where they needed to be on the court, just really make them feel comfortable coming in. And it's still a young group. So I think him coming in and leading, Naji, Jose, Dyson, like those guys was huge this year.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about Larry like he's this old grizzled vet, like he's LeBron's age or something. He's still a pretty young guy. We just talk about him as this old vet because of the youth on the team that he's with. But it seems like he is that glue on that bench unit, and it seems like every team is sort of trying to emulate a Larry Nance Jr. type. The versatility he offers, and between the defense, between the small ball 5 play that he offers, the athleticism, when you need a little changeup, it just seems like he's invaluable in ways that maybe aren't that glamorous, most of the time.
You love a guy that hangs their hat on defense, right? Like he prides himself on being very good on that end of the court. I was going through some of his sound, putting together some of these pieces, and he said something about he loves his defense, but he's like, my job's really easy. Like I get 2 feet in the paint and it's just me in the hoop. Like all I got to do is dump it off. Yeah. He's like, everybody else has to do way more work, like moving the ball, hitting harder shots. He was like defense and then, just
sounds
putbacks,
easy.
like dumping balls in at the underneath the basket. He's like, my job's not hard. I'm like,
I can't do
I mean,
it.
I appreciate that. Exactly. But
he struggled towards the end. He even said he couldn't jump towards the end of the season. And bless him, he was trying out there. He was still going on the court, trying to gut it out. But obviously a big part of what we got to talk about Larry Nance Jr. is we didn't get to see his best self, especially towards the end of the season. He was injured. He was trying to go out there. He was trying to play for the team. But it looks like he's going to need another season just to get right. He was struggling through a lot of stuff there.
Yeah, I mean, there were a few different things. I mean, there was the shoulder for a little while, and then ended up being ankle, I think, foot at the end of the season.
Yeah, sprained ankle. Injuries,
And I appreciate the fact that he did everything he could to be on the court and be effective in the minutes that he had. But I love the self-awareness to be like, hey, I think that you guys would be better without me in this moment.
Yes, that was huge.
Yeah, I think that's great. And no one is going to question him because you saw him lay it all out there.
He has guts. He's trying. Yeah. If he's sitting out, it's for a reason. You know that about Larry Nance.
Right. And I think that's to your point, and praising other players, on the team for their work and effectiveness. I think that he was like, this point, last game of the season, of course he wants to play.
Yeah.
It's a playing game.
Of course.
But for him to sit out and be like, no, I'll just support you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of his biggest strengths is just as a player, as a pro, is just he totally understands what his role is. He understands
self-awareness is huge.
Okay, this is what I do well. This is maybe what I don't do as well. By the way, he shot 61% from the field. So when you were talking about all I had to do is just stand by the rim and drop it in. I mean, career high. That was a career high for him. I didn't realize that until I had just looked that up. That was the best he shot.
I think his career high, no, I don't know if it was points, but season high was 22. That's his jersey number. Okay, sorry.
That's a little sweet thing for Larry. We love Larry Nance here. It's great to see Larry Nance Jr. sort of contributing to the defense of the Pelicans. Pelicans ended up with the 6th overall defense in the NBA. Of course, Larry Nance, a huge part of that. Herb Jones, a part of that. We talked about Trey Murphy sort of improving his defense, being the second in steals and blocks on the team. With a fully healthy Larry Nance, and you hope with a fully healthy Pelican squad, and maybe Zion can play a little defense when he's healthy and whatnot. I mean, do you see him continuing to be sort of an integral guy coming off the bench when we continue to have a fully healthy squad, hopefully next season?
Yeah, I mean, I think what he brings to that second unit is huge. Like to have somebody like him that you can rely on, that you know what you're going to get. He's going to be great on the defensive end. He's going to be that leader, make sure everybody's where they need to be, doing what they need to do. Like, I think that's huge.
Yeah.
It's not only his leadership on the court, but I think, and this is kind of like going away from your question, but the way that he handles things off the court too.
Yes.
And, when
he's teaching a lot of that stuff to these young guys, and it's a necessary component of basketball.
It's not just about basketball.
Yeah.
He understands that he has a platform and he uses it. the work he does in the community, auctioning off his jersey, giving money to the schools. I mean, he spends time every single game talking to students after the game. You know, like he's so much more than what we just see on the court. And I think that's a super special side of who Larry is.
Well, Jim, we sort of talked about it. It's like, you know, especially with the Knicks and Josh Hart, sort of he's thriving there, and it seems like, you know, he's found a home and a fan base that loves him. Of course, every fan base loves Josh Hart, but, you know, it hurt to lose him here, and for a while it stung. But Larry Nance and CJ and what they bring to the team, not that we don't still miss Josh Hart, but it seems like it takes the sting off a little bit when you've got a Larry Nance Jr. in there.
Yeah, it really does. And I think, like you guys were saying, when you have a roster that's comprised of a lot of guys that they just drafted in the last couple of years that are at the beginning of their career, that's even more important. It'd be different if, you know, this team was full of guys that are, like, say, Milwaukee, a team like that has a bunch of guys that are in their late 20s or early 30s. They've been around forever. They don't really need somebody to kind of guide them through some of the different aspects of how to get better as a player, how to, you know, work in the offseason, stuff like that. So, yeah, I definitely think that Larry is really invaluable in that aspect, just based on how many young guys the team has. But I think defensively too, if going into next season, I know we have a lot of time before we even get into, you know, looking ahead and previewing next season. But I think the fact that they were top 6 is near the top of my list of reasons to be encouraged, because I can't see a way that they're not a really good offensive team if they have close to the full health or just much closer to full health than what they had this year.
So, and Larry said that in his exit interview. He was like, if you would have told me at the beginning of the year that we'd be top 6 defense, then I would have been like, okay, yeah, we're number 1 in the West. Like, no question. Because everybody knew on paper what they would be offensively, but the question mark was defense. And the way that side came along, and a lot of it was because Larry committed to that side of the ball and other people followed. You know, again, I think it takes
leadership.
Exactly. You know, I think that's huge.
We love to hear from Larry. We want to see Larry on the court being his best self. But yeah, just the versatility he offers, the athleticism that he offers off the bench. Love to see him interacting with the players. Love to see him interacting with the fans and the students, as you talked about. Erin, thanks so much for joining us on the Pelicans podcast. Again, you've been our rock this week when we needed you the most. I know you're very, very busy. Continue to check out Erin's coverage following these Pelicans players as well on pelicans.com. And you're going to be very busy with Saints stuff, so good luck.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what off season means.
People
really.
keep saying off season, but I see you running around frantically. So good luck with that quote unquote off season, Erin. Huge thanks to Erin Summers coming through once again for the Pelicans podcast. You know, it's gonna continue being busy for us, Jim. Got a few more of these podcasts to do. Going to continue sort of looking at the players that helped the Pelicans along this season and what lies ahead.
Yeah, Joe, we're down to our final 2 guys. Thursday will be Naji Marshall. Friday will be Dyson Daniels. But you know what? We didn't want to leave you with just the top 10 guys that played 900 minutes or more who get specific player recaps. Part of the next 2 shows, at the end of each show, we're going to kind of go through maybe some of the clips from exit interviews of players like EJ Liddell. You're going to get your Garrett Temple moment in the spotlight. We're going to get some Josh Richardson commentary, Kira Lewis Jr. So basically that's another thing to look for. The last couple shows is we're going to, you know, at least mention some of the other players that were part of the roster this year and just go through some of the most notable things that they said during their exit interviews.
And of course, there's a lot of interest in some of those players. I know a lot of fans were clamoring for Kira Lewis, you know, to get some more minutes and whatnot. It's going to be an interesting offseason to see sort of the development of these guys. I mean, easy to forget that Trey Murphy was, you know, in the G League around this time, the offseason previously. So Kira Lewis may have a more prominent role coming into next season. Who knows? There's so many uncertainties right now. It just seems like it's going to be a fun time. You know, we hate to be out of it, but now's sort of the in the lab time where it gets a little fun to predict.
And part of the lab will be in early July, the first half of July, when the team gets together for Summer League and they play some games out there. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that Dyson Daniels said that he is planning on playing there. I'm sure we're going to get to see EJ Liddell if he's at that point in his recovery.
Right.
Unfortunately,
People
last year
excited about him too. Yep.
Yeah, unfortunately, last year that was where he got injured, was during one of the games
Right.
in Summer League. But Darian Sebron, there's I'll be curious to see who participates in Summer League. But it's always fun to get to see those guys play, and that's a big part of their progress this summer, just to see how they can do in Las Vegas, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So continue to keep your jeweler's eyepiece tuned to the information, Jim. I know you always do. You're the information man. Big thanks for helping me out today, Jim. I'm a little tired. There's been so much to do, but you get me through as always, my friend. Thanks for being my friend.
Hey, man, no load management this week on the podcast. We're doing back to back 5 days straight. So.
Yep, we don't stop. We sleep here. We just wake up and do podcasts every day. So that's what we're doing here at the Pelicans studio. No big deal. It's just what we do. We will talk to you once again tomorrow. Yep, we're going to continue doing it, and we will be talking about Mr. Naji Marshall, the knife. So we will talk to you then, and until then, go Barrel!
Thanks for listening to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast, presented by SeatGeek. Join us 3 times per week on Pelicans.com, the Pelicans mobile app, or you can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. We'll see you next time right here on the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast, presented by SeatGeek.